As she withdraws cash from an ATM, a woman is suddenly confronted by a mugger. The man has no idea that her dog is a trained police canine and quickly suffers the consequences of his actions. "Please help! Someone help me! Get this dog off of me!" Grace looked on in shock as Max gripped the man's arm tightly and showed no signs of letting go. The mugger shouted as the dog firmly held his arm with its mouth. He attempted to push Max away with his foot, but the dog maintained its grip. Grace stood frozen in terror, unable to make a single move. However, a voice inside her head was telling her to stop this madness right now. She knew it was a matter of time before the man suffered a serious injury, and despite the fright he'd given her when he attacked, she didn't want him to end up at the hospital, or worse. "Stop it!" she wanted to yell at the man, but the events that had happened were still fresh in her mind. How had she even ended up in such a scary situation in broad daylight? It was a sunny afternoon, the kind of day that made Grace Mitchell glad to live in a city with so many parks and outdoor spaces. She had just finished her shift at the veterinary clinic and was looking forward to a quiet evening at home with her dog, Max. Max, a large German shepherd, had been her companion for the past 5 years. He was no ordinary dog. He was a retired police with an impressive service record. Grace never wanted a retired police dog in the first place. Having worked as a veterinarian for a long time, she knew that extra care and attention were needed when handling them. She also knew that some of the retired police dogs often suffered from PTSD and separation anxiety from being so far from their handlers. However, Grace could not say no to her little brother, Pete. He was currently in Quantico training to become an FBI agent. "Please, sis, you are the only one he listens to." Grace remembered the desperation in her brother's voice. "This is a police dog. Why can't the other officers take care of him? I'm sure the department is quite capable of handling Max's needs. You know why. It's just for 6 months. I'll be back to take him before you know it. Plus, here's a letter from the department approving Max to be under your care." Max had been trained as a police officer in the K-9 unit ever since he was a puppy. He became one of the best officers the Santa Lama department ever had. His handler was Pete's partner, Greg. The two were always together, and they formed quite a strong bond. However, one day Greg got into a shootout with some dealers. Grace did not know all the details, but Max was at the scene when Greg died. The death of his owner gave Max so much trauma that his life became depressing. He would bark at any officer who tried to pet or instruct him. The only person he tolerated was Pete, and everyone suspected it was because he shared in his grief. As Max began to pose more of a challenge for the police department, the chief decided to transfer him to Pete's care. However, that was precisely when Pete received his acceptance to join Quantico. He had no option but to take Max to Grace's house and ask her to look after him. He and Greg had visited multiple times with Max in tow, and the dog had always felt at ease in her company. Besides, Pete argued that Grace had the basic training needed to deal with a special dog, considering her veterinarian status. Grace tried to argue, but she knew she could not say no to Pete, especially when he was torn between staying home and reliving the last moments of his late partner's life, or moving on with a new assignment in a new city that would give him the fresh start he desperately needed. So, she opened her home and heart to the dog. Grace still remembered the first time she saw Max. He was so depressed that her eyes teared up. She could not imagine the pain he was dealing with. Sadly, she could relate. She too had lost her husband 2 years ago. Until then, she felt that she could never move on. She knew at that moment that if anyone could understand Max and care for him sufficiently, it would be her. It didn't help that Pete came with the authorization letter and instructions for Max's care. That was over 9 months ago. Pete never came back. He graduated top of his class and was sent to the FBI's field office in Miami. He was currently under probation but loved every minute of his work. In a way, Grace felt like she was set up. But having gotten accustomed to Max, she did not know whether she wanted to give him back. Little did she know that this dog would save her life and give her the closure they both needed. Grace and Max adopted a beautiful routine. She was too ashamed to admit it, but having the dog in her life made her a better person. She had become physically active to meet some of Max's needs. Every morning, the two of them went out on a 5-kilometer run. They would come back, have breakfast, and then head over to Grace's clinic. She had left Max at home the first day, but she quickly realized it was a bad idea. At work, Max had claimed the corner spot in her office. He would spend the day sleeping in that corner while Grace cared for the other animals. Funny enough, Max never exuded territorial rage. Apart from the occasional growl, Grace only knew he was in the room when an animal barked or hissed at him because he would rarely make a sound. It was as if he knew that her workday was sacred, and he was respecting it. Some days, Grace would take him with her to house calls. Max especially loved it when they went to a nearby ranch. He would enjoy running in the wilderness, chasing birds and other wildlife. After work, Grace would either take Max to the park, or the two would take a walk, then have dinner, watch TV, and go to bed. It was a comfortable routine that changed on this particular day. Normally, Grace was a very organized woman. She had her life planned to the T, but sometimes even she ended up doing things on the spur of the moment. She and Max were on their evening walk when Grace spotted a beautiful Imperial Majesty dog collar. She walked into the store and asked about it. She discovered that it was made from premium Italian full-grain leather and lined with soft lambskin for ultimate comfort. It featured an integrated GPS tracker, memory foam padding, and waterproof capabilities. The attendant informed Grace that a custom fit would require a waiting period of 5 days. She also had to pay a deposit. When Grace heard how much the collar retailed for, she nearly passed out. Then she remembered she had more money she could use, and that her dog deserved the best for being such a good boy in the face of all the adversity he had gone through. It wouldn't hurt to try. Grace ended up paying the deposit and then added $100 to have Max's name printed on the collar. As she left the store, Grace remembered that she had paid for the name with the money she needed to get dinner that night. So, she decided to stop by the ATM on her way home to withdraw some cash. Max trotted beside her, his leash loosely held in her hand. The streets were busy with people going about their daily routines, and Grace felt a sense of security with Max by her side. As she approached the ATM, she noticed a man loitering nearby. He was dressed in tattered clothes and had an unsettling look in his eyes. Grace's instincts told her something was off, but she brushed the thought aside, attributing it to her naturally cautious nature. She stepped up to the machine, inserted her card, and began her transaction. At that point, something unpleasant happened. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. Out of nowhere, the man lunged at her, grabbing her arm and demanding she hand over the cash. "Give me the money now," he growled, his grip tightening. Grace froze for a moment, fear paralyzing her. But then Max sprang into action. With a deep, authoritative bark, he leaped at the man, sinking his teeth into the attacker's arm. The man yelped in pain and tried to shake Max off, but the dog held firm, his training kicking in. The commotion drew the attention of passers-by. Within moments, a crowd had gathered, some people filming the incident on their phones while others shouted for help. The attacker, realizing he was outmatched, managed to free himself from the dog's grip and fled down the street, clutching his arm. Max stood there beside Grace, watching the man flee. The crowd that had gathered around applauded, and Max took it all in. Grace quickly called 911, her hands shaking as she reported the attempted robbery. Max stood guard by her side, his eyes alert and ears perked up. Within minutes, police officers arrived on the scene. Grace recounted the events, emphasizing Max's role in thwarting the attack. Officer Daniels knelt down to pet Max, a smile spreading across his face. "Good boy, Max. Looks like you haven't forgotten your training," he said, giving the dog a pat on the head. The other officers watched in wonder as Max appeared calm and collected. Grace saw them speaking to one another and realized that they were amazed the dog had not barked viciously at Daniels. Up until 9 months ago, he would have recoiled at the sight of a uniformed cop touching him. They glanced at Grace, curious about what she might have done to Max. Grace was completely unaware of their gazes. She was overwhelmed with a mix of terror and triumph over what had just happened. She was a little bit worried about what could have happened if she had been alone, but luckily Max was with her. She couldn't wait to tell Pete all about it in their evening call, but that's when the officer said something that made her world turn on its axis. Someone might be ready to rejoin the force, Daniels joked. For some reason, Grace felt a stab of worry from those words. She realized at that moment that she wanted to keep Max, not for some time, but forever. However, she also knew that her pet was a police officer, and keeping him in her home was not in his best interests. "I'll worry about that another day," Grace decided. The two of them were escorted home by the police. However, something kept bugging Grace. She couldn't help but feel as if the attack on her meant something more. The way that Max had sprung into action made her feel as if he knew the assailant somehow. She knew he had been trying to protect her, but the viciousness he displayed with that bite seemed a little too unwarranted. However, she dismissed the thought for the night, choosing to worry about it another time. Later that evening, Grace received a call from Officer Daniels. They had identified the attacker as Tom Rogers, a known petty criminal with a history of addiction. What was puzzling, however, was that Tom's actions were becoming increasingly erratic. The officers suspected there might be more to the story. Grace couldn't help but silently agree with what Daniels was saying. "We believe Tom is being manipulated by someone higher up. His recent behavior suggests he's not acting on his own," Officer Daniels explained. This was largely due to the fact that Tom attacked Grace in broad daylight, something even the dumbest of criminals never did. It was also not the first time Tom had done something so absurd. "We need to investigate further, and we could use your help," Daniels said. Grace hesitated. She was just an ordinary citizen, a veterinarian with a retired police dog, but the thought of more people being put in danger compelled her to agree. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked. Over the next few days, Grace worked closely with the police. They discovered that Tom had been frequenting an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The location was known for illegal activities, and it was likely where Tom had been receiving his orders. Officer Daniels asked Grace if she and Max would accompany them on a reconnaissance mission. Max's skills could prove invaluable in sniffing out danger and providing protection. Grace agreed, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. She had complete faith in Max and was confident in his ability to handle any situation. Together, they joined the officers and headed to the warehouse, arriving discreetly under the cover of darkness. The warehouse stood silent, its crumbling structure casting elongated shadows under the pale moonlight. The team moved cautiously, Max leading the way with his nose to the ground. As they approached the entrance, the dog suddenly stopped, his ears pricking up. He let out a low growl, signaling that something was amiss. The officers fanned out, searching the perimeter, while Grace and Max stayed close to the entrance. Inside, they could hear muffled voices and the clinking of metal. Officer Daniels motioned for Grace to stay back as they breached the door. Inside the warehouse, they found a group of men gathered around a table covered with money and weapons. Tom Rogers was among them, looking more disheveled than ever. When the men saw the police, chaos erupted. Some tried to flee, while others reached for their weapons. Max, sensing the danger, swiftly intervened, holding him firmly in place. Grace watched in awe as her sweet dog reverted to his police training, expertly subduing the suspect. The officers quickly gained control of the situation, arresting the men and securing the evidence. Tom, who had tried to escape, was apprehended by Officer Daniels. With the situation under control, Grace walked toward Max to lead him out of the building. However, the dog remained frozen on the ground. Grace tried to grab him, but he growled menacingly at her, warning her to stay away. This confused Grace, but before she could process it, Max shot forward, barking ferociously. Daniels and another officer darted after him while everyone else stood worried. Grace followed too, and soon came across one of the most bizarre scenes she had ever seen. Max was attacking a man, scratching his body while barking at him. The man tried to crawl away, but Max never stopped his actions. When the dog saw Grace, he quieted down and allowed Daniels and the other officer to apprehend the man. "Oh my God! This is Machete, the man who murdered Officer Gregg. We have looked for him everywhere, to no avail. All we knew was that he has a deep-cut scar on his right cheek. He must have been here and tried to flee, but Max must have recognized his scent from the day Gregg died," Daniels exclaimed. Max walked slowly toward Grace, ashamed for barking at her, and worried she might kick him out. But Grace understood everything. She knelt and hugged the dog, happy that he could find solace knowing the man who wronged him was behind bars. Back at the police station, Tom confessed to everything. He had been coerced into working for a local lord named Victor Martinez, who had threatened his life and the lives of his family. Tom's desperation had led him down a path of crime, culminating in the attempted robbery at the ATM. He also provided evidence that tied Machete to Gregg's and a few other unsolved murders. With Tom's confession and the evidence collected at the warehouse, the police successfully built a solid case against Victor Martinez and his associates. Grace and Max played a pivotal role in ensuring the criminals were brought to justice. It was also a significant day for the police department, as they were able to secure justice for their fallen officer Gregg, who had been Max's former handler. A few weeks later, the police department organized a ceremony to recognize and honor everyone who had contributed to the investigation. Grace and Max were awarded commendations for their bravery and assistance. Max, ever the professional, accepted his award with a wagging tail and a proud bark. Officer Daniels approached Grace after the ceremony. "You and Max did an incredible job. We couldn't have done it without you," he said, shaking her hand. Grace smiled, looking down at Max. "He's the real hero. I'm just lucky to have him by my side." Fortunately, the police department decided that it would be unwise to remove Max from Grace's care. They had been easily convinced after the latest ordeal, and also thanks to a glowing recommendation from the FBI. Pete had officially become an agent, and Grace couldn't be prouder. Life slowly returned to normal for Grace and Max. The incident at the ATM changed Grace's perspective on her quiet life. She realized how valuable her dog's training was, and how much he still had to offer. She decided to volunteer with the local police department, offering Max's skills for community outreach and education programs. She also found the strength she needed to move forward with her life. She realized that if Max could overcome the loss of his master, then she too could find the strength to move forward. Did you enjoy this story? Do you agree that dogs can save our lives in so many ways? Do you know someone who's been saved by their dog? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the story, please subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Max, always loyal and eager to serve, embraced his new role. Together with Grace, they became a symbol of courage and cooperation in their community, proving that even in the face of danger, ordinary people and dogs can make an extraordinary difference. Thank you so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.